Well, joining me now to discuss what is and isn't being done to tackle the world's refugee crisis is Meredith Owen. She's the Deputy Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Immigration and Refugee Program at CWS. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, given the record number of refugees over the past year, what are the issues that are really at the forefront this World Refugee Day?
Absolutely. Because we are facing the worst refugee crisis in history, there are more than 25 million refugees worldwide. 4/5 of them are actually in neighboring countries from countries they had fled and where they're from. And about a third of refugees are in least developed countries worldwide. And so it is absolutely critical that we are calling on the U.S. government as well as the international community to partner together to help scale up both refugee protection, humanitarian assistance, as well as refugee resettlement.
And we certainly heard from the UN there saying that it's actually the poorest countries that continue to shoulder the burden of the refugee crisis, and that Western countries don't seem to be doing their share. Why is that?
Well, I think that we can look at the need for refugee resettlement to help stabilize regional and global security. So, for example, when we have increased the number of resettlement countries and the number of refugees we are resettling, we can then offer that stability as a release valve for the host countries that are welcoming the most refugees. So, for example, Turkey, as you noted, has the highest number of refugees among host countries, and if the U.S. and other countries commit to more refugee resettlement, that allows refugee kids to have opportunities to go to school in those host countries. It allows refugee adults to have the dignity of work, and so it is absolutely critical that we scale up that protection.
So for some of these poorer countries, how are they dealing with the crisis? Obviously, we have a country like Jordan that already has a high unemployment rate. How are they managing the situation?
Well, I think that there are a number of refugees who are not just in refugee camps. A lot of refugees are in urban situations today, and so the dynamic is looking a little bit different, especially as conflicts become more and more protracted, and that is why we always bring it back to the importance of making sure that the wealthier nations or the developed countries are able to offer a release valve in terms of humanitarian assistance and support so that refugees and displaced persons' basic needs are being met.
And one of the reasons we see a lot of pushback is because there seems to be a lot of misperceptions about welcoming refugees. And the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, warned President Trump and other world leaders that it was damaging to depict migrants and refugees as threats to jobs and security in host countries. So what is the reality when it comes to the short term when refugees first arrive versus the sort of long-term economic impacts as well?
Absolutely. I think that that is a really important question to ask. Refugees are incredible contributors to local economies. In the U.S. in particular, they have created jobs, they drive growth, and they have revitalized neighborhoods. For example, in 2015, 13% of refugees were entrepreneurs. In Columbus, Ohio, they have supported more than 21,000 jobs and contributed $1.6 billion to the local economy. One refugee that we work with, his name is Tara, and he has started a local grocery store, local restaurants, and we see that across a number of communities around the United States. Similarly, in Lancaster, refugees fill important jobs in the manufacturing industry, and we know that our friend Mustafa, who's a former refugee from Somalia, has started a social enterprise business that connects refugees around the world with local community members. And so it's certainly a misperception that they aren't drivers of economic growth, because especially over time you can see how they buy homes, they pay taxes, and they drive a lot of growth for our country.
And certainly those are important stories that really do need to get out there to kind of balance out a lot of the rhetoric that we hear. Now, we know that the U.S. is putting pressure on some of these Central American countries in how they're dealing with the refugee crisis. How is Central America dealing with this? And now that the U.S. has cut off aid, how does that affect the situation?
Sure. Well, I think it's really important that we remember that all people have the legal right to seek protection where they feel safe. And when we are responding to a humanitarian crisis in Central America, especially in countries like El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, and even in countries like Venezuela that is facing a protracted displacement crisis, it's really important that we have policies in place that show compassion and show welcome. It's important that the United States and other countries address the root causes that force displacement, as well as providing that humanitarian aid and offering asylum and refugee protections.
Certainly very important. Thank you so much for joining us. Meredith Owen there, Deputy Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Immigration and Refugee Program at CWS.